Hello, everyone. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. Will you please say hello to Forrest Nelson, Honor Class 2015 Honor Swimmer. Forrest, say hello.
Hello, yeah.
A brief biography: he's a Triple Crown swimmer, so that's the English, Catalina, and Manhattan Island. He's in the 24-hour club for a 48-mile circumnavigation of Catalina Island, which I believe is still holds a speed record. A 40-mile double crossing of the Catalina Channel, and the first Catalina to mainland crossing by a male. He swam the Cook Strait in Tampa Bay, to name just a few of his swims. He's also done a couple of these really big marathon relays, 50+ hours. In the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, we only induct people in one category. So Forrest came in as a swimmer. He also would have presented at this point a really compelling nomination as an honor administrator, as he's now ending 10 years of president of the Catalina Channel Swimming Federation. I still thank Forrest for managing my crew when I swam Catalina, and he's been one of the great supporters of IMSHOF over the years. He's a gold patron, and he's attended 7 of the last physical induction award ceremonies: US, Scotland, London, and Melbourne, Australia. So Forrest, my first question for you is, give us an overview of a typical Catalina booking. You know, how far in advance? What are the chances it happens on the day? What does the boat look like? Crew, observers, safety talk, all of those good things.
How much time do you have?
We have a little bit of time.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. The Catalina Channel Swimming Federation now has a digital portal for online applications. We open the applications up at the beginning of each year for that particular year. We offer a discount if applications come in before May 1st. Otherwise, it's a full sanction fee. And we allow applications up to 45 days before your attempt. So there's quite a bit of leeway for individuals late in the season to try to get in perhaps a second channel. If they've, we see that quite often. Somebody's had a successful swim and they look around and, hey, what else is available? And Catalina can be available in October if you can get that application in within 45 days. We have a review process before accepting applicants. Sometimes there's a conversation about inexperienced swimmers, making sure that the training is proper. It's rare that we deny an application. More often, there's a conversation of, let's delay the attempt. Let's get some more training in, perhaps get some experience with another channel. Santa Barbara Channel Swimming Association is a great example of, they've got a 12-mile swim off of Anacapa. Try something like that before you come to Catalina. The day of the swim, well, let me back up just a little bit. There's an introduction to our 2 observers that happens about 2 weeks in advance of a swim. And then the observers are in communication with the athlete or with the team captain on a relay. The day of the swim, then everybody meets down at the docks. Now, we meet in the evenings. We'll talk later about the weather patterns and why we're meeting in the evenings, and it's an overnight swim and an overnight attempt in Catalina. And there on the boats, most of the boats, there are 4 recommended vessels. They're dive boats, so that they are large crafts, more than 60 feet, and have bunk spaces for up to 20 people. Very big boats can really fantastic for multiple relays. We allow more than 1 swimmer in the water, so that, for instance, 3 relay teams could be on 1 boat, 3 swimmers in the water at the same time going exactly the same pace. That's the requirement when we have more than 1 swimmer in the water. If you've got to go the same pace, there's no separation more than just a few feet. The conversation on the boat before we leave the docks is about safety, about the rules on the boat, how to use the facilities, where to vomit and not vomit, when to have conversations with the boat captain about exchanges in and out of the water. We use kayakers also in Catalina. We can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. And then the observers read the rules, make sure that the interpretation of the rules for the entire support team is understood. And then we motor out to Catalina. It's a 2-hour motor ride on the vessels to the start location. The start location is quite a ways from Avalon, which is really the only city, town on the island of Catalina. There's a small community called Two Harbors. It's very near our start, but we go to the location that's shortest distance to the mainland. We prefer to start on the island because it's protected from the island. The cove is protected by wind and waves, so it's on the leeward side, rather than trying to start at nighttime with Pacific swells and still some wind waves hitting the mainland. John Pittman, who is one of our retired captains, when I asked him why do we go from Catalina mainland, he said, I prefer getting closer and closer to the hospitals. If something were to occur, we're just that much closer. But for safety purposes, it's a much easier start on the island than trying to start at nighttime on the mainland.
Tell us a little bit about what percentage of swims actually happen on the day. So when people book an English Channel slot, they're booking 7, 8, 9-day slot in a preference. When somebody books the 5th of September, what are the chances they're going to go on the 5th of September?
Probably 95 days out of 100. It may be 99 days out of 100, though this year we did have quite a few delays. We had an unusual weather system. We had a hurricane, don't remember her name, but on the Pacific, coming up the Mexican coast, that brought in some wind and swells and some really difficult currents. So this year was atypical. Other years, because of Southern California, Los Angeles has beautiful weather around the year, but especially in the summertime, the weather patterns are very stable. We don't have any rain, we don't have any storm. So that what we know is that the winds will will calm down after sunset, and then will rise again sometime in the late mornings. So it's beneficial. The best opportunity for a swimmer to be successful is to start at nighttime and to pull that all-nighter, swim throughout the night, and hope that they can get to the mainland before the winds kick up. So that because that weather pattern is so stable, a swimmer that schedules their boat pilot on September 5th and then applies with the Catalina Channel Swimming Federation for September 5th, and then they train for September 5th, and then they travel for September 5th, 95 out of 100 times they're going to swim on September 5th. Now, it is a 2-day event, and September 5th, is that the day that they start or the day that they're going to finish? We talk about September 5th into September 6th is what we talk about.
So typically the boat is leaving the harbor between 9 and 10 at night, and the swimmer starting 11 to midnight, gets in 4, 5, 6 hours in the dark, and then wonderful, the light comes on and it's bright time.
That's pretty much the case. Meeting at the docks, usually about 7:30. 9 p.m. is probably the latest that we're leaving the docks now. And the swimmers are jumping in the water. This year, when I was reviewing the observer logs, 10:30 to 11 o'clock seemed to be the real sweet spot, is when they were putting the swimmers in the water.
So an extra hour of the night, but one less hour of that sometimes adverse current towards the very end, and always that wind at the very end.
That's right. And you ought to be the strongest at the very beginning. So if the conditions haven't completely calmed down, you're able to handle it. You'd much rather have to handle windy, swelly conditions when you're strong than when you're trying to finish.
You mentioned for us 2 observers. I think for myself and probably other experienced marathoners who've been around the world, we only ever see 1 observer. You've got 2 observers, and they seem to do more than most observers. Tell us how that works.
2 observers, so that we're always making smart decisions because we are well rested. In particular, because we are pulling an all-nighter, trying to force one observer to make wise decisions throughout the crossing, and staying up all night. Just doesn't seem, it's safer to do it with 2. And so that we have observer training in the springtime. It's become more of a classroom setting. We have a PowerPoint presentation for 3 to 4 hours. Not only do we go over our culture, our rules, the mission of the Federation, but then we complete all of that. We talk about hypothermia and we talk about our boat propellers. Those are our 2 main concerns when it comes to safety, is when we put kayakers in and out and relay swimmers in and out, we want to make sure that those propellers are in neutral and can't harm those individuals. And of course, hypothermia. Though I'd be interested in hearing from you, but certainly we have warming oceans in the Pacific, and our temperatures have been increasing year after year. In the sweet spot of August and September, it can be 23 degrees Celsius, more than 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Our observer training then concludes with case studies. We take actual observer logs, reduce it down to some core ingredients, some core messages that were written down in the logs, and present that in our classroom setting of, did the observer make the right decision? How did they make the right decision? Or perhaps a decision should have been made sooner, or something should have changed, should have withdrawn somebody a little bit sooner. And so that we go through that with our trainees and our veterans. Everybody comes back year after year. Safety is that important. We need to practice. We need to practice these things, and that includes our first aid training, our CPR training, and our training on AEDs, the automated external defibrillators that we have not had to use, but in case that we were to have an issue like a heart attack, we would be ready to treat somebody, to be that initial responder before the professional first responders could be there.
So my observation is your safety measures are amongst the best I've seen anywhere. It is interesting that in most of the Western world, you won't let a truck driver operate for 12 hours without a break. You'll let a student doctor operate for 12 hours without a break, which I think is absolutely nuts, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So this idea that your observers are taking breaks and staying fresh. Your observers also have a more involved role in safety than observers in many of our associations and federations, where that first call of safety is maybe the crew chief, followed by the pilot. I think in Catalina, it's the observers.
It's all 3, but we do certainly afford our observers quite a bit of authority, though that we do stress that there's a chain of command, and that the boat pilots are at the top of that chain of command. And so that if they feel like they need to call the swim, well, there's nobody that's going to overrule that, for sure.
And are the Catalina swims still essentially a dead straight line?
For the most part, the slowest swimmers in difficult currents will get pulled one direction or the other. Talking a little bit about the topography of the channel, it's a very deep channel. It's 3,000 feet, 1,000 meters. We have some very cold water. You don't have to go that deep. The surface water is warm, but you go deep enough. And so we have a lot of temperature fluctuation across the channel day by day, and depending upon where you are in the channel. And we have an upwelling for the final 3 miles, 5 kilometers. that we can expect the water temperature to get colder and colder as you get closer and closer to the finish. I don't remember your experience. If it got colder for you, there are times when it doesn't. I have been observing a swim that it dropped more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit, more than 5 degrees Celsius. That if a swimmer is not prepared for that, it's crippling.
So Forrest, I had the best conditions in the history of the Catalina Channel. There was a hint of a ripple, and I'll go fisticuffs with anybody that denies there was a hint of a ripple. It never appeared, and I screamed across that channel, no adverse current, no upwelling. I had a magical day.
Yes, and we enjoy observing swims that are faster than 9 hours. Yes, yeah. We had a good lunch hour.
Tell us about wildlife.
Yeah, every ocean's got some wildlife. This year, almost every swim, there's dolphins, especially in the morning. They're often curious and come by and swim with the swimmer, swim by, check out what's going on. Sometimes if the swimmer's not expecting that, it can be a little frightening initially. I've certainly on training swim, dolphin get really close to me, upside down, taking a look, hey, what's going on? But they are fast, beautiful swimmers, but I was not expecting them and wanted to jump out of the water immediately of, whoa, what's going on? Mola mola, we saw this year. Occasionally we'll see a whale. Usually it's just a spout that we get. Occasionally there's we get a fluke. We'll see the tail come up. Swimmers are concerned about sharks for sure. And they seem especially concerned about sharks at night. And all that I can tell them is that everything that is swimming in the ocean in daylight is also swimming at nighttime. So it does not matter. It does not matter what time of day you're in the ocean. There are sharks in the water, though it is exceedingly rare that we've had to call a swim because of a large dorsal approaching the boat.
You've done both English Channel and Catalina several times. Tell us why Catalina's easier than English Channel, or why it can be easier, and then why it can be harder.
Sure. I had a fun conversation with Michelle Macy, who is a inductee into the Hall of Fame, an Ocean 7 swimmer, I believe. I know she's the first American Ocean 7 swimmer, and I believe the fastest woman when you accumulate the cumulative time of all 7 crossings. So I asked her, she's been in 7 different channels, of how to rank them in terms of difficulty. And she apologized in advance and said, Catalina is the easiest. Here's why. She said, it's not the distance, it's not the water temperature, it's not the conditions. It's not only our organization, but what I talked about on that September 5th, schedule your swim on September 5th and you get to swim. So that in that sense, the mental aspect of knowing you don't have the roller coaster ride like in Dover of waiting for weather.
Or not swimming potentially.
Or potentially not swimming at all because you're perhaps 3rd or 4th in line and you're waiting for those other swimmers to finish. So that the organization is well set, we've well established. The boat captains are experienced, and therefore it can be easy mentally, though physically, just like the English Channel, it's about 20 miles long. It's an ocean channel with a shipping lane. After that, they're completely different beasts. How difficult? Pulling an all-nighter if you're not prepared for that. 4 a.m., we often see swimmers become unmotivated or motivated to go find their pillow, find their spouse at the hotel room.
Forrest, the witches arrive at 4:30 in the morning. The witches arrive, and they go, yeah. What are you doing out here? Aren't you too old for this? Whose stupid idea was this, Ned? The witches arrive.
Yeah. And I think I'm not 100% confident on this, but I believe seasickness is more prevalent at nighttime. The 2-hour boat ride to Catalina is, we see supporters and swimmers alike not prepared for dark traveling on the ocean at nighttime, and they'll arrive seasick. And boy, if you want to make a channel swim challenging, start compromised. And so that's another reason. And we have had, I can certainly think of one story in particular, but we've had swimmers so ill at the start that they said, we need to go home. We need to, let's just turn back around, and we're not going to start at all.
I had a lovely snooze on the way over.
Did you? I try to get a nap in, but so often it's that lucid dream. I don't know how to describe it, but you're not fully resting, but your thoughts are really freaky, you know, just unusual thoughts and dreamlike state, but not a full rest.
Tell us a little bit about the history of not only the Catalina Channel and swimming, but of your organization.
So Catalina, we are approaching our 100th anniversary. 1927 was the very first swim. A very wealthy American, William Wrigley, owned Catalina Island at the time and wanted to turn it into a year-round tourist spot. And therefore, in January, when the water was the coldest, and they were measuring it at 54 degrees at the start, offered a huge cash prize to winner take all. Hundreds of people showed up to apply for the swim. A little more than 100 were at the start, and within the first hour, I think it was down to a couple dozen swimmers, if only a dozen. And George Young from Canada was the very first swimmer, and because it was winner take all, even the other swimmers that could have finished and ended up doing a Catalina swim in the weeks after that race, they pulled up of, I'm miserable enough and there's no money in finishing second, so let's just pull up. So that's the 100th anniversary is 2027, January of 2027. The Federation was founded starting in the late 70s. There was a group, the Orca Swim Club, some really talented swimmers, including Hall of Fame members Cindy Cleveland, Penny Lee Dean, John York. Siga Rose was their coach. Those individuals were testing the boundaries of human swimming endurance and breaking new ground. Especially Cindy Cleveland was the first one to swim around Catalina Island, Anacapa two-way, Monterey Bay in Central California. Anyway, this group realized that they had something special with the Catalina Channel. They were doing solos and two-ways, and wanted to replicate the Channel Swimming Association. And so the very first year of the Catalina Channel Swimming Federation is 1981. And the official records, Penny Lee Dean went back to research newspaper articles to make sure that all of the swimmers, and that there were about 20, I think, 25 or so before the Federation was founded, that they are all credited with their crossings. And so the Federation just celebrated their 40th anniversary.
For people to wonder what a whole lot of money was in 1927, that winning purse in 1927 translates into about $600,000.
Yes.
So it's it's a staggering amount of money. And if you ever want a good feel, bad feel story, Forrest presented at Mr. Young's induction into the Swimming Hall of Fame, the kind of a story of this raw 17-year-old farm boy from Canada who had a motorcycle which broke down and hitchhiked his way to California. No one ever heard of him, and beat the finest swimmers of the time on the biggest purse ever imagined. And then kind of didn't get any much of that money.
that a 17-year-old was taken advantage of. Yep. Unfortunately, there were people that knew how to con them.
Looking back at your last 10 years as president, what are you most proud of, either of your own accomplishments or the group? I don't really, you can mix and match, but what do you look back on and say, geez, we really got X right, we really got Y right, we did these things really well?
I'm going to go to observer training. When I got involved in the group, it was more informal. It was a conversation in backyards, telling quite a few stories, but not at the time. I felt like not core of talking about what to expect as an observer, and what is typical happening out there. But we really do need to focus on the propellers and the hypothermia, and we need something more concrete. And so moving to a PowerPoint, and it is more of a classroom setting. It's not a backyard barbecue anymore. But what's happened with that is our pool of observers, and we're lucky. Southern California has 20 million people. And we have hundreds of miles of beaches. So we have a lot of watermen, water women. And so our observers are just not marathon swimmers. Some of them are recreational swimmers, and some of them aren't swimmers at all. They can swim, but they come from other backgrounds and are just, as I think we all are, awed at the accomplishment of seeing how far somebody can swim. And so that our pool now is more than 50 individuals that fill our 2 observer roles for each swim. And this season we had 80 applicants. So that's 160 observer roles that we need to find. And we've got 50 observers to pull from to make those assignments.
We interviewed David Clark a year or so back, and David is kind of my personal safety hero. I think I'm remembering back, he said like in the first X years of the Catalina Channel Federation, he was on 60, 70, 80% of the swims, and he saw no end of problems and tried to change the whole ethos. And I think when you and I, Forrest, were first involved in this sport, you get people would say things like, I'm not getting out. I'm going to die out there, or I'm going to make it. And I don't hear that so much anymore. We also, if we look 10, 15 years ago, we kept the swimmers in too long. Yeah, as a rule, if their arms were still moving, we kept them swimming. And I think more and more we talk now about, you guys have something about better to keep them out of trouble than get them out of trouble. So what's your motto on that?
Yeah, and it comes from David Clark, who you were not alone in. David has really set the tone for our group and when it comes to safety, and he is one of our more experienced observers and a key factor in our observer training based on that experience. He says better to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And if you've ever been in an emergency situation, and we can take yourself out of the swimming just on land, any sort of emergency situation, when one thing goes wrong, it becomes a domino cascading effect of other things. You're not thinking straight sometimes because of an urgency, and things go haywire. And so therefore, better to stay out of those situations than try to work yourself out of that situation, because it can become chaotic in trying to recover from a mishap.
I think he said something to me like, it's not about keeping them from death. We're past keeping them out of the hospital. We now want to make sure that if they have to get out, they can get out safely, mostly under their own control of the boat, not on the end of a gaff. So we're trying to move that entire safety thing further forward. And, if the swimmer can't pee, if the swimmer can't talk, if the swimmer can't swim straight, those are signs that you have a problem. Don't let the problem get bigger. Deal with the problem right now.
Yep. Go into, I mentioned the water's warming. We have fewer hypothermia situations. I think we're moving more into fatigue situations. Again, when we were being introduced to the sport, when I was looking at the history of the times at Catalina, 15 hours kind of seemed to be the top mark. And they didn't go much longer than that. And now we're seeing 18, 19, 20 hours. And I think that's because of the warmer waters, that individuals, I don't have proof on this, just a theory, that we're seeing swimmers in the water longer because it is warmer. And that shifts the observer's role a little bit. We're still concerned about hypothermia, but the fatigue factor comes in more and more. When it comes to hypothermia, we have introduced a simple test that is a math problem. And
Used to be, what's your middle name?
what's your middle name? And now the math problem is, and we described the math problem beforehand so that they do, that we know that they can do simple math, and two, that they do understand it's a word problem. And the observer gives a number to the swimmer, and we're asking the swimmer to reply with the number that adds up to 5. So this is math that you can do as an 8-year-old. 8-year-olds can do this math. If a swimmer can after 10 hours, well, they're hypothermic. So if I were to give you the number, Ned, if I were to give you the number 4, you would come back to me and say,
hopefully 1.
hopefully 1. Now you can also do it hand signals. We've got a couple of digits, right? We've
The
got
last
the
time we were
thumbs
out
up.
there, Forrest, you gave me the hand signal, if I remember right.
Okay.
It was 1, but it was a different number.
That's right. And so that's a way to simplify and codify, if you will, the hypothermia test. We test them in advance, just like I did with you. I like to do it when I know they are not hypothermic, when they're in the water, with the wind waves and the water hitting the hull, and there's a distance also. I need to know that they can hear me clearly and that they can pass the test when I know they ought to be able to pass the test, so that when we get to a point that they're hypothermic, and they may not fail the test, but they're too slow at answering a simple math question, that's it right there. They can answer it correctly, but if they take too long, the brain has gotten too cold and the mental capacity has begun to decline, and we are approaching the place of serious hypothermia. So let's keep out of trouble and withdraw them now.
When the ambulance guys in Ventura, up near the Santa Barbara Channel, asked me my name at the end of the swim, I mean, I knew my name. It might have taken me a minute or two to tell them, but I knew what my name was. That's probably not a good sign.
And I had a similar experience in Central California, where I finished a 10K swim, very ill, and thankfully somebody immediately recognized it and asked me where I was and what day it was, and I said, that's a stupid question. And she said, I know it is, but you can still answer it, right? I said, if you give me a minute, I will. And I spent, well, I got an ambulance ride to the hospital, is what my day was.
The other explanation, perhaps, Forrest, is that for swimmers taking longer and longer in the Catalina Channel, is the sport's become more popular.
Yes.
And the range of really fast swimmers to not so fast swimmers has broadened.
That's right.
And our sport is quite giving to slow swimmers in the right kind of situation. whereas a lot of other sports aren't particularly forgiving for those kinds of things. I think as well as it's become popular, we've had some unbelievably untalented swimmers do some incredible things.
Yeah.
You know, my own stroke, for example, makes the swim coach cry, and not in a good way. So the last question I have for you is your boats have done something a little bit different in the last couple of years, and a mechanism for charging more for longer, which I find fascinating, and I'd like you to explain it for folks.
Sure. Rather than a flat rate, they do have a flat rate for a particular amount of time. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number. I think it's about 10 to 12. The typical, our median time for the last 10 years, 50% of the swimmers are faster than 13 hours. 50% of our successful swimmers are slower than 13 hours. And so the boat captains, it's actually been around a little bit, quite a bit longer actually than you stated, of Bottom Scratcher in particular instituted an hourly rate. I swam in 2004, Catalina, under an hourly rate. And after I crossed 9 hours, I remember at each feeding going, oh crap, there's another $100. So, but that's the purpose. Is they're out there and they've got their own expenses, and the longer that they're out there, the more that they wind up charging. I haven't heard any harsh feedback about that, but I do sympathize with the slower swimmers. Of it is going to be, it's already an expensive sport. It becomes a little more expensive for them. Yeah.
So the feedback that I get is, first of all, talk about expensive sport. You can do marathon swims costing virtually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You got your friend with a boat. You make sure you've got reasonable safety precautions. You get permission from whatever port authorities or coastal authorities there are. And this can be, you're buying the crew some dinner afterwards, and you pay for the gasoline or the petrol or diesel or whatever it's going to be. Some of the popular named swims are expensive, particularly when you start flying a crew across the world.
Yeah.
The other complaint I get is that some events, almost all mass swims, have a cutoff time. So a 2 kilometer swim might have a 2-hour cutoff or 3-hour cutoff. And that's when all the safety crew and all the volunteers and all the beach setup, it needs to start coming down. And there's some anger that there's a cutoff. And I try to explain to people there's practical reasons for it, like it gets dark.
Yes.
And most of these mass swims are volunteer organizations or charity organizations, so people understand. As far as Catalina charging, longer for longer, I just go through the mathematics. The boat crew's probably on board an hour or two before anybody else arrives. You've got then the safety discussion, you've got the motoring out to Catalina, and you've got the average 13-hour swim. We're now up to 18, 19 hours.
That's
they then
right.
have to get back to port another hour or so. Then they have to clean the boat. So that boat's out there for 20 hours. You've got 2 pilots and a couple of paid crew?
Yes, at least.
At least. So this is there's a lot of people involved, a lot of hours, and that boat then may have a swimmer the next 24 hours later.
Yeah.
So there is a reason for a late swim penalty. And I guess in Catalina, because the conditions are fairly consistent and you're going primarily in a straight line, there's a little less drama than there is in English Channel, where you get the world's biggest spring tide and you're blown halfway to Belgium.
That's right.
Forrest, any final thoughts from you on 10 years of being the president of the Catalina Federation?
No, I don't think so, but I look forward to seeing you in New York City, May 5th, 6th, and 7th for another Hall of Fame induction. Um, we'll have a longer conversation there.
Now, last time, no, I have to, I can't let that go for us. Now, last time
Oh,
we were in Australia and there was the 10K swim.
yes,
Yeah, and I remember distinctly doing the 10K swim. Did you do the 1K or the 5K? What did you think that you did? And when
I
we
think I
come to
did
New
it.
York, are you going to do the full whatever it is in Coney Island?
I won't promise anything. Um, I think we put together a relay. I think is what I think. There were 3 of us, and we did a relay for that 10K.
So I'm going to
You
give
look
you
fantastic.
my hot chocolate and my donut order for New York. And you could be waiting for me when I do whatever it is that swim's going to be.
I did not miss the on my leg of the Melbourne the relay. I did not miss a 10K worth of jellyfish.
Oh, there were some there were some big hairy jellyfish.
There were some really big here. Yes, there were.
Unusual. They didn't sting particularly bad, but they were quite big.
There was I swam a lot longer than whatever that lap was, a 2K or whatever. I swam a lot longer than 2K avoiding the jellies. Yep.
Forrest, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in New York.
Thank you.